Nobody tells you what it actually looks like. Not the magazines. Not the documentaries with their soft piano scores and slow-motion footage of waving hands and helicopter arrivals. None of that. What it actually looks like, I can tell you, because I was standing close enough to smell the rain on the pavement, is two people trying very hard to just be people. And that is a stranger, more complicated thing than any crown. It was October. A Tuesday, which matters somehow, because nothing extraordinary is supposed to happen on a Tuesday. The kind of morning where the sky over Windsor is the same gray as the inside of an old coat, and the tourists near the Long Walk are huddled into themselves, collars up, still taking photographs because they came all this way and they're going to get their photographs. I was one of them, technically. A journalist, yes, but also genuinely, embarrassingly starstruck in the way you don't admit to your colleagues. I'd been assigned a soft feature, Follow the Waleses, through a semi-public engagement in a town just outside Windsor, one of those community center visits where local schoolchildren present drawings and everyone eats slightly stale biscuits and calls it connection. The piece practically wrote itself, I'd thought. I was wrong. The motorcade arrived the way motorcades do, that strange hush before the cars, like the air itself clearing a path. 2 vehicles. No fanfare. A protection officer stepped out first, scanning the car park of a primary school the way a man scans something he has memorized and still doesn't entirely trust. Then, the door opened. William got out first. He's taller in person than photographs suggest. There's a physical presence to him, something that has nothing to do with title and everything to do with the way a very large man learns to move carefully through small spaces. He was wearing a navy suit. No tie. Which, I would later learn, was deliberate, a small, studied signal of informality aimed at nervous 8-year-olds. Catherine came around from her side. This is where I have to be careful, because every instinct I've spent years training as a journalist tells me to reach for the stock phrases. Radiant. Poised. Effortlessly elegant. All of it useless. All of it the verbal equivalent of a screensaver, the image without the reality behind it. What I actually saw was a woman smoothing the front of her coat with one quick, private gesture, not for any camera, not for us, and then lifting her chin in a way that looked less like composure and more like someone deciding, again, in real time, to walk through a door. 2 beats of standing still. Then, she smiled. And the smile was real. That's the part that got me. After everything, the scrutiny, the years of it, the relentlessness of public consumption, the smile when the headmistress came rushing forward with her hand outstretched was a genuinely warm thing. Not performed. Warm. The school was called St. Margaret's. Small. The kind of building that smells like school dinner and poster paint no matter what time of day you arrive. The headmistress, a woman named Mrs. Okafor, late 50s, unflappable, the type who has clearly survived 17 Ofsted inspections and was not about to be destabilized by royalty, led them down a corridor lined with the children's artwork. They stopped. Both of them. Really stopped. Not the polite, half-step pause of people performing interest. A genuine stop in front of a painting, a child's watercolor of what appeared to be the sea, or possibly a blue explosion, it was difficult to tell, and William crouched down to read the name at the bottom. Theo, he said to nobody in particular. Just said the name. Like he was noting something. He straightened up and looked at Mrs. Okafor. How old is Theo? 6, she said. Nearly 7. He nodded slowly. Something moved across his face that I couldn't name cleanly. Not nostalgia exactly. Something adjacent to it. The way a parent looks at the age their child used to be. George was 7 at the time. I knew that from the briefing notes. I don't think William knew I knew that. I don't think it would have changed anything if he had. Catherine had moved a few steps ahead. She was talking to one of the younger teachers, a woman barely out of university, visibly terrified, holding a clipboard she clearly didn't need, and the conversation looked less like a royal engagement and more like 2 women comparing notes. The teacher laughed at something. Covered her mouth. Laughed again. I wrote, genuine ease. Then, I crossed it out. I wrote, the specific skill of making a person forget they're nervous. And kept it. The formal part of the visit was in the main hall. 30 children, sitting cross-legged on a floor that had been very recently polished and still smelled of it. A small boy near the front had a crown drawn on his hand in blue ballpoint pen done by himself, from the wobbly evidence of it, and he kept looking at it, then looking at William, then back at the drawing, conducting some private comparison he hadn't yet resolved. William sat on a chair that was slightly too small for him. Didn't ask for a different one. Folded himself into it with the particular patience of a man who has sat on many wrong-sized chairs. "Who can tell me," he said, and his voice is different when he speaks to children, not softer exactly, but stripped of something, some careful register it carries in formal rooms, "who can tell me something true about themselves?" Silence. The specific, electric silence of 30 children deciding simultaneously whether to trust this. Then, a girl near the back, 7, maybe 8, wearing one plate that had mostly escaped its bobble, put her hand up. "My granddad died," she said. The room stiffened. Teachers shifted. One of the protection officers near the door made a very small movement. William looked at her steadily. No flinch. No hurry to redirect. "Thank you for telling me that," he said. "What was his name?" "Derek," she said. "Derek's a good name." She nodded, apparently satisfied with this. The session continued. But I was still sitting with the instinct he had, instantly, without pause, to ask the name. Not "I'm so sorry" or "that must be hard" or any of the cushioning language adults use to stop a child's grief from landing in the room. Just, what was his name? He lost his mother when he was 15. I'm not going to explain that further. The reader can hold that. Afterwards, after the biscuits, after the photographs with every member of staff who wanted one, after a boy called Marcus showed Catherine a card trick that didn't work but that she applauded with convincing delight anyway, they stood for a few minutes near the entrance. This is the part one keep coming back to. No cameras. The press pool had been moved outside 5 minutes prior. I had stayed behind under the professional fiction of checking my recorder, which I am not proud of and which I would do again without hesitation. They were standing about 4 feet apart, the way people stand when they've been navigating a shared room for an hour and have just reached the quiet edge of it. William was reading something on a page a staff member had handed him. Catherine was looking at the display on the wall, the children's self-portraits, each one labeled with the child's name and one fact about themselves. "My name is Amara. I like dinosaurs and my mom. My name is Leo. I can do a somersault but sometimes I fall." She stood in front of them for longer than the situation required. William looked up from his page. Looked at her. Didn't say anything. She didn't look back, but something in the set of her shoulders changed, the kind of change that happens when you feel a person's attention even when you're not facing them. "Ready," he said. She turned around. The look on her face was, and I am being as precise as I can here, the face of a woman who has just felt something private in a public place and is deciding, now, very quickly, whether to fold it away. She folded it away. "Ready," she said. And they walked out. I stood in that corridor for another minute. Looking at the children's portraits. At Leo, who can do a somersault but sometimes falls. At the fact that 2 people can share 22 years, because that's what the record shows, Windsor Beginnings, St. Andrews, the whole long winding road of it, and still have moments in a primary school corridor that belong entirely to themselves. That can't be photographed. Can't be briefed. Can't be packaged into a feature. It just sits there, in the air, after they've gone. The school went quiet. Mrs. Okafor appeared at my elbow with a cup of tea I hadn't asked for. "Nice people," she said simply. I wrote that down too. End of part 1. There's a specific kind of silence that happens outside Kensington Palace. Not silence exactly. The traffic on the Kensington Road never stops. There are always pigeons, always a tour guide somewhere in the middle distance saying something about Princess Diana. But, inside the gates, past the Black Iron, past the guard position at the south entrance, there is a quality of quiet that feels different from the city around it. Compressed. like the air remembers being kept still. I came back 3 weeks after the school visit. Not for a formal engagement this time. What I was there for was harder to explain, the kind of journalism that gets pitched as texture and atmosphere and that editors look at sideways until the piece lands and, suddenly, it becomes exactly what we were looking for. I wanted to understand the daily shape of their lives. The parts that don't make the wire service. What I found, on a Thursday in early November, was a story I hadn't expected and couldn't have invented. The guard's name was Corporal Ryan Ashworth. Late 20s. Household division, posted to the palace entrance for a 6-week rotation. I know his name now because of what came after, but, on the morning in question he was simply a figure in a bearskin hat standing with the specific immobility of a man who has trained his body to become something closer to architecture than flesh. I had been standing nearby for perhaps 40 minutes watching, taking notes on the tourist behavior, the rhythm of the changing, the way visitors from somewhere like Ohio or Osaka would approach the guard with their phones outstretched and their faces arranged into a mixture of delight and slight guilt, the way you look when you're about to do something you know is mildly rude but are going to do anyway. Ashworth did not react. This is what they train for. The absolute stillness. Eyes forward, chin level, the bearskin hat making him look simultaneously ancient and faintly surreal against the London morning. A group of German tourists, 8 of them, were arranging themselves around him for a photograph. This is standard. This happens 50 times a day at every royal residence. The tourists know not to touch, they don't always know not to crowd. The tour guide, a young woman in a yellow coat, efficient and, clearly well practiced, was directing her group with the authority of someone herding cats with a degree in it. Everything was routine. Then, the child appeared. She was about 4 years old. Red coat. Blonde hair in 2 bunches, one of which had partially escaped. The kind of child who moves through space the way water moves through a crack, finding the gap before anyone has registered there was one. She had separated from what I would later understand was a family of 5: a mother, father, 2 older siblings who had discovered a discarded crisp packet near the gate and were engaged in the serious business of arguing over it. The gap in adult attention was approximately 8 seconds. 8 seconds is a lot of time when you are 4 and the world is full of interesting things. The interesting thing, in this case, was the enormous man in the tall black hat. She walked directly up to him. Not the nervous, testing creep of a child approaching something unfamiliar. The straight-line march of a child approaching something that is, as far as she is concerned, simply there to be investigated. She stopped approximately 6 inches from his boot. She looked up. She looked up for a very long time. Then, she put her hand on his boot. The German tour group noticed first. A ripple of indrawn breath. Phones redirected. The tour guide in the yellow coat took a half step forward and, then, stopped, unsure of protocol, defaulting to observation. Ashworth did not move. He is not supposed to move. This is the instruction, the training, the entire architecture of what the job requires. You hold. You endure. You become the wall. The little girl patted the boot twice. Considered it. Then, looked up again at his face so far above her it required a full tilt of her entire body, and said something. I was 20 feet away and the noise from the road was such that I could not hear it, but the shape of it, the rise in her voice at the end, suggested a question. He did not answer. Of course he did not answer. She patted the boot again. Her mother had located her by this point, that specific maternal movement, the controlled sprint that manages to be both unhurried and absolute, and was crossing the stone toward her. Lily, come away from, and here is what happened. Here is the part one wrote in my notebook in full sentences, immediately, because I knew I needed to capture it exactly. Ashworth's eyes moved. Not his head. Not his body. Not his hands. His eyes moved a single, fractional rotation downward, lasting less than a second, before returning to the fixed point ahead. He looked at her. She was too small to have seen it. The mother possibly didn't see it. The tour group, whose phones were all aimed at the child, were unlikely to have caught it in frame. But I saw it. The mother scooped up Lily, who made the brief, indignant sound of a child being removed from something fascinating, and turned away, murmuring apologies to nobody in particular. The German tour group exhaled collectively and resumed their photograph. The tour guide in the yellow coat made a note on her clipboard. Ashworth was still. Completely still again. As if nothing had happened. But the stillness was different now, or I was reading it differently, which comes to the same thing. Because I had just watched a man who had turned himself into a wall choose, in one unobserved moment, to be a person. To look at a small child who had crossed the stone and put her hand on his boot and asked him something in a voice I couldn't hear. To look at her. Just that. Nothing more. I was still processing this when the car came through the south gate. Not a formal procession. A single dark vehicle, moving at the pace of ordinary traffic, and if you didn't know what to look for you might not have looked at it at all. But I'd learned to read the small signals by then, the way the staff near the gatehouse adjusted, the particular quality of attention that moves through a space when certain people move through it. The car stopped on the inner drive, partially obscured by the line of trees that run along the inside of the wall. The protection officer from 3 weeks ago. I recognized the way he moved, careful and fast simultaneously, the professional contradiction of it. Then, William, in a different suit this time, carrying what appeared to be a child's drawing, folded once, slightly crumpled, the kind of thing you carry in a jacket pocket because putting it down somewhere would be the wrong thing to do. Then, Catherine, talking on a phone. She finished the call by the time she reached the steps. Stood still for a moment in that way I'd noticed before, the 2-beat pause, the decision made in the body before it shows anywhere else, then, went inside. William was still standing on the drive. He'd stopped. Was looking at something. I followed the direction of his gaze. He was looking at Ashworth. Or rather, and this is where it gets harder to write precisely, he was looking at the space around Ashworth. The dispersing tourist group. The mother with Lily, now 20 feet away, the child's red coat visible between the iron railings as they reached the pavement. He watched them go. Then, he went inside. I stayed another hour. Long enough to watch the guard change the formal, clipped choreography of it, the new man taking up the position, the slight adjustment of weight as Ashworth moved away from the post and became, in the space of 20 steps, a person again instead of architecture. He rolled his shoulders once, when he thought nobody was watching. I was watching. I wrote it down. I thought about the gap between what a job requires you to perform and what lives inside the performance. I thought about a man holding absolute stillness for 4 hours, trained to endure tourist cameras and tourist proximity and the long tedium of being looked at and choosing, in one unguarded moment, to look at a 4-year-old who'd walk straight up to him as if he were just a person standing there. Because he was. That's the thing about all of it, the palace, the cars, the protocol, the bearskin hats, the motorcades, the schools with the children's paintings on the walls. Underneath all of it. People. Just people, trying to hold the line between the weight of what they represent and the small, irreducible fact of being human. The little girl in the red coat had known that instinctively. Children usually do. I called my editor that evening. Told her I had something, but it was going to be difficult to explain in a pitch. She said, "Did anything happen?" I said, "A guard looked at a child." She was quiet for a moment. "Write it," she said. Intimate portrait, William and Catherine Part 3, What the Rain Knows. The last piece of this happened by accident. That is the honest version. The version I didn't put in the published feature because it made me sound too much like a person and not enough like a journalist, which is a distinction that takes about 15 years to stop believing in. It was a Saturday. I wasn't working. I was in Norfolk for a completely unrelated reason, a university friend's birthday, a rented farmhouse, the kind of weekend that involves too much wine and not enough sleep and everyone saying they should do this more often knowing they won't. I had driven out alone that morning, early, because the farmhouse was full of sleeping people and I am constitutionally incapable of sleeping past 6 regardless of what I've been drinking. The road took me, without particular intention on my part, through a village called Anmer. If you know, you know. If you don't know, Anmer Hall sits in the Norfolk countryside, a Georgian house in the grounds of the Sandringham estate, and it is where William and Catherine have made, over the past decade, the closest thing to a private life that their situation permits. I parked on the road outside the village. Not near the hall, I want to be clear about that. On the public road that runs past the church, where dog walkers and cyclists and farmers with nowhere particular to be have as much right to stand as anyone. The morning was cold enough to see your breath. I didn't plan what came next. That's the truth of it. The church at Anmer, St. Mary the Virgin, which is what half the churches in English villages are called, as if the county ran out of names, is small and flint-built and sits in a churchyard with the particular quietness of a place that has been receiving the dead for 900 years and has made its peace with the arrangement. I went in because it was cold and the door was open. Stood in the nave for a moment, letting my eyes adjust. That stone and candle smell. A vase of chrysanthemums on the altar, the cheap supermarket kind, which somehow made the whole space more real. I sat in a pew near the back. Not praying. Just sitting. The way you sometimes need to in old stone buildings. To let the noise inside your head settle to the level of the noise outside it. I had been there perhaps 10 minutes when I heard the latch. They didn't see me. I want to state that plainly and without excessive drama, because what I am about to describe sounds like something I constructed and I did not construct it. I was sitting in the back pew. The back pew of St. Mary the Virgin is in a shadow even on bright days, and this was not a bright day. Catherine came in first. Jeans. A wax jacket the color of old moss. Hair loose, which I had never seen in any official capacity, and which made her look younger and this is the word I keep coming back to, the word that keeps resisting replacement, unburdened. Not carefree. That's a different thing. Unburdened. Like she'd left something heavy at the door. She didn't genuflect or make any formal gesture. Just walked to the pew about halfway down, on the left side, the way you walk to a specific seat in a cinema because it's the one you always take. William came in a moment later. He had mud on one boot, which told a story about the morning. He looked like he'd been outside for a while. The cold had put color in his face, and he was carrying a small bunch of field flowers, the kind you pull from the edge of a path, the ones with no particular names, that were already starting to droop in the warmth of the church. He put them on the altar next to the chrysanthemums without ceremony. As if it were a thing he did. As if it were a Tuesday thing, a habit, something no camera would ever record because nobody would think to set one up here. Then, he walked down to where Catherine was sitting. He didn't sit immediately. He stood beside her for a moment. She shifted slightly, making room for him even though the pew was empty for 6 feet in either direction. He sat. I should have left. I know that. I know the argument, it was a private moment, they had a reasonable expectation, the right thing was to slip out quietly and pretend I'd been somewhere else. I stayed because I couldn't move. Not for any bad reason. Because of something I felt in the quality of the silence between them. A silence that was not empty. Packed with something I couldn't name and wasn't going to try to. They sat for perhaps 5 minutes. Not speaking. Not praying in any demonstrative sense. Just sitting. The way two people sit who have shared the particular weight of a public life, a watched life, a life that is simultaneously more significant and more scrutinized than ordinary human lives are built to bear, and who have found, in a cold flint church in Norfolk on a Saturday morning, a place where none of that applies. William's hand was on the pew between them. Not reaching for her hand. Just there. Open. Present. Her eyes were closed. Outside, the wind moved through the churchyard with the sound that wind makes in old trees, the low, coastal Norfolk sound, half groan and half patience. A bird somewhere in the rafters shifted its weight. She opened her eyes. Looked up at the east window, plain glass, no stained pattern, just the gray Norfolk sky coming through, and stayed with it. The children are going to be awake, she said. Her voice in the empty church was different from any recording I had ever heard of it. Quieter. Unpolished. The slight roughness of someone who hasn't spoken much yet that morning. I know, he said. Neither of them moved. George asked me last night, she said, why some people are famous and other people aren't. What makes the difference? Silence. What did you tell him? She didn't answer immediately. She was still looking at the window. I told him I'd think about it. He made a sound, not quite a laugh. Something close. The sound a person makes when the answer to a question is I don't know how to answer this either, and they can't say that, and they can't say anything false, and so they make the small sound of holding both truths at once. She glanced at him. He was already looking at her. The look on his face, I am going to try to say this once and move on, was not the face of a prince. Was not anything from the wire service, not any image I had seen reproduced in any newspaper. It was the face of a man looking at a woman he has known since they were 19 years old, both of them different people then, and finding that the thing between them is still after the years, and the eyes on them, and the losses, and the whole unimaginable machinery of their lives still there. Whole. Intact. He reached out and tucked a strand of her hair behind her ear. She leaned into the gesture the way you lean into the warmth of something that has always been warm. I got up. I did it as quietly as I could, which was not quietly enough. The pew creaked in the way 900-year-old wood creaks, with total indifference to your situation. Catherine's head turned. We looked at each other for one full second. I recognized her. She recognized me, not personally, but professionally. She knew what a journalist looked like, standing in a shadow at the back of a church, and she had spent a life knowing. I don't know what I expected. A sharp word from the protection officer who must have been outside. I had simply not noticed him, which was his job. A frostiness. A closing down. She looked at me for one full second. Then, she turned back to face the window. That was all. I walked out into the churchyard. The cold hit my face with the blunt honesty of Norfolk cold in November, which has no interest in being romantic about itself. The protection officer was at the gate. He looked at me. I looked at him. We had a short, wordless conversation conducted entirely through eye contact, the conclusion of which was, you didn't see anything in there, and we both know that isn't true, and we're both going to proceed as if it is. I walked back to my car. I sat in it for a while with the engine off. That part, the church, the flowers with no names, the question a child asked about why some people are famous, never made the published piece. The editor asked if I had everything I needed. I said yes. Some things are in their privacy simply by being real. The moment you try to translate them into print, something leaves them. The living quality of it. The specific weight of two people sitting in a cold church on a Saturday morning with their whole visible lives waiting for them outside. I translated a version of it. The feature ran. It was well received. But, what I'm writing here, in these pages that are for something different, a longer reckoning, is the image I can't shake, the field flowers on the altar. Drooping slightly. Next to the supermarket chrysanthemums. No occasion. No photograph. No reason, really, except that he'd pulled them from the edge of a path on a cold morning and brought them to a church where he sometimes sits. That's it. That's the whole story. Except it isn't a story. That's the point I've been trying to find my way to through all three of these parts, through the school and the guard and the church. It isn't a story. It's just a life. A real, strange, heavy, tender, scrutinized, irreducible human life. Two of them, actually, knotted together at the root since they were 19 years old in a university town in Scotland, and now living in the full glare of everything that means and everything that costs. George asked why some people are famous. His mother told him she'd think about it. I'd been thinking about it too. I don't have a better answer than she does. Maybe the honest answer is this: being famous is what happens to a life from the outside. What a life actually is, what it feels like from inside the skin of it, that is yours. Entirely, stubbornly, privately yours. A church in Norfolk. A drawing in a jacket pocket. A look that no camera caught. Those things belong to them. I hope they always will.